It has never felt harder to keep your money or your identity safe. I'm Siri Agrell, the CEO of BetaKit, and it feels like every day we are writing or reading about new ways to get hacked, compromised, or scammed. I'm sure almost everyone listening to this thinks about this issue a lot, especially business owners, startup founders who must protect their customers as well as their bottom line. But if you think cybersecurity is top of mind for you, imagine how important this topic is if you work at one of the world's largest financial institutions. Mastercard is at the front line of cybersecurity every single day, and I can't think of a better company to be talking about this issue with. Joining me today is Mastercard's Amisha Parikh, Vice President of Security Solutions for North America.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I want you to talk to me about what you're seeing out there right now. What is the cybersecurity landscape?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're right, it is scary. So hopefully we can talk today about what's happening in the industry, but also what we can do about it. There are a number of mega trends that are shaping the world around us and, propelling the cyber industry forward. And these include, continued rapid digitization. I think we can all attest to the fact that our lives are moving online and a lot more of our interactions are online. The unprecedented levels of connectivity. I think everybody you hear people saying they feel like they're tethered to their phones or regularly, on their devices, and just the exponential growth in data that's available. And when we talk about the growth of data, that's sort of data available and data at rest. This concept of data at rest is like things like card on file. Sometimes you've saved your credit card payment information online. Just all
the information.
You save your email. You save all that information. But as a result of this growing digitization, there's growing e-commerce volumes and then new payment technologies. More of our interactions as they're taking place online. The unintended consequence of that is that there is more risk. Right? That data is out there and it's available. And we even talk about things like the dark web, this mysterious dark web. Mm-hmm. But, there's commoditization of data that exists on the dark web. Yeah. And so any risk of data being leaked, stolen, resold kind of puts information at risk. In addition to that, we're seeing these kind of persistent threats around scams. Things like investment fraud. We oftentimes hear about romance scams, job seeker scams. And then we're seeing new forms of fraud being enabled by technologies like deep fakes, which are AI enabled, new types of phishing scams, and then voice cloning. So all like different examples of how technology, data sharing, and kind of the interception of how we do things every day are being impacted, but also resulting in increased risk. And the technology that we are all embracing and that's making us more powerful. We talk about things like AI and Gen AI, but they're also making the bad actors in the ecosystem more powerful. These fraudsters are no longer, sitting in a basement hacking. They're sophisticated criminals. And so as Canadians, we really need to understand what these risks are and what we face being part of this digital world and take the right steps to protect ourselves.
I'm fascinated by the idea that scamming is now an industry, that this is not just a couple trolls in the basement. This is not just a couple bad actors. This is a job. This is a sector. This is like a real industry designed to use this new technology that you talked about to rip people off. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the industrialization of cyber threats?
Absolutely. So you talk about it being an economy. Cybercrime, if it were an economy, would track as the third largest economy in the world, only behind the USA and China.
In that it's generating as much, like it has the GDP of a major nation?
So it's in terms of the size of losses and the value of the fraudulent theft.
That's crazy.
And I think it's forecasted to reach over $10 trillion by 2025, according to Cyber Ventures. And so it is huge. When we think about just what the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is has been reporting in terms of the increase of losses to scams and fraud. It's reached over $550 million in 2023. And it's important to note that that's based on reported data. And what we find is that only 5 to 10% of fraud is actually reported.
Really, people aren't even talking about it. They're just kind of dealing with it and moving on.
Right. And there's different reasons for that, right? There's an element of people believe they're vigilant, and there's a bit of embarrassment around, oh my gosh, how did I fall for that?
Absolutely.
There are emotional elements when we think about some of these scams, like romance scams, where, they're preying on people's human emotions, whether it's somebody who's, craving connection, a job scam where, it's stressful to be seeking employment. And so they're preying on these sort of human emotions, vulnerabilities. And so at the end of that, when you find out that you've been scammed, that the emotional devastation along with the financial, repercussions of what has happened to you, a lot of times people are just like, you know what, I want to close this chapter and not talk about it anymore. And when we talk about some of the types of fraud in relation to some of the examples we just chatted about, oftentimes, and this is where the types of fraud we're seeing in the ecosystem are very challenging, is that individuals are actually authorizing the movement of money from their accounts. So in these scam situations, emergency scams, we hear about the grandparent scams, where a grandchild is supposedly phoning and asking for money to help them with an emergency situation. That money is being sent willingly. And so from a financial institution perspective, the fraud itself is not happening within their four walls. It's happening outside. And so when money movement is authorized, it's really, really hard to track it and recover it, because oftentimes it goes into money mule accounts. It very quickly disappears into crypto exchanges and alternative payment currencies that are much harder to track.
Right.
And so the importance of reporting is there, but also the immediacy of reporting, because time is really of the essence to catch these cyber criminals.
So it's getting more complex. They're using more sophisticated tools. They're moving faster. They're getting your money out of your accounts, out of your business, like at the speed of light. And it's harder to do anything about. That's kind of where we're at?
Yeah. So it's definitely more complex. And I think the importance here is around, the importance is vigilance, but also the identification, recognition, and reporting in a very time-sensitive manner. So where I think people are like, I'm just going to sit on this for a while, by reporting it quickly, there have been instances where, some or all of the money can be recovered. But it's really, we're talking about such an important state of collaboration. Yeah. And I think that's another important thing that, we can talk about, is just the value of collaboration in this, because you're not just talking about, at this point, your financial institution. You're talking about where that money's moved to, possibly an exchange that lives outside of your financial institution. So all of these entities need to be working together to be able to stop the bad actors in the ecosystem.
I want to talk about that. I want to talk first, though, about businesses specifically, right? Like you mentioned romance scams, you mentioned grandparent scams. I think when we do hear about cybersecurity threats, we're thinking about the personal, right? We're thinking about the individual vulnerabilities that we have. It's Cybersecurity Month. It's also Small Business Month. A lot of BetaKit's readers are founders, CEOs of companies. Talk to me about how this is impacting business right now. Are you seeing just as many scams targeting corporate entities, business accounts, as you are individual accounts?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and we know that small businesses make up 98% of the Canadian business landscape. So very important to be thinking about them feeling protected. In recent research that Mastercard Canada had conducted, only 16% of Canadian small business owners that we surveyed felt that they knew what to do in the event of a cyber attack. So we're not only talking about scams, we're talking about cyber breaches, data leaks, compromises. And this is really where I think small businesses are a target. we're finding that they're being targeted a lot of times because those vulnerabilities feel more exposed. The other thing is, there's the question of why, right? We hear, why a small business? Why is this like little bakery down the road a target when they're just keeping a record of orders of their, of their regular customers? But the challenge is when you start to look at supply chain risk, a lot, and the connectivity, as I talked about at the beginning, we're all interconnected, and small businesses are connected to larger organizations, whether it's for, we talk about obviously banking, but we have other types of, you have a database management software company. You might have, you have different along your supply chain. You might have suppliers in your supply chain that supply to many different restaurants and foods. I'm using the bakery example. But in that connectivity, what we found is supply chains can create risk because as they're digitally connected to each other, going in and a cyber attack on a small business can directly allow for connectivity to everyone along the supply chain.
So it's a way into the supply chain through small business. That's so interesting.
And so they'll find that where a big business might say, we've got our external doors closed.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to use the door analogy because they've locked and secured all their external doors. A supplier is coming in through your internal door. And so when a vendor or supplier or somebody is breached, there's automatically that supply chain risk, which is another reason why, another thing to think about for businesses is who are you doing business with? Ensuring that not just the connectivity with those suppliers, those vendors, those partners is important, but that you're also going through the appropriate sort of risk evaluation of those entities. And so, I think the risk when we think about just a small business around cyber attacks is, we said it's not just if it happens, it's likely when it will happen because we know that the risks are real, but the importance of ensuring that small businesses feel prepared, feel that they have the tools to their availability. A lot of times it's very overwhelming. And, at Mastercard, we've developed a cybersecurity assessment tool, which is intended to help small businesses understand where those vulnerabilities are and make recommendations. It's a complementary tool that's available, but to help them understand, where they can identify that risk. But I think as we talk about small business risk, absolutely keeping it top of mind is really important because a lot of small businesses wouldn't be able to sustain a large-scale cyber attack.
Yeah. I like almost thinking about these scammers as an industry, that it's a job. It's somebody's job to try and rip you off, to try and find that open door. And so from a business owner or business leader's perspective, it also has to be your job to stop them, right? Do you find that makes it more manageable than just, God, it's this overwhelmingly dangerous world and I don't know what to do about it?
Absolutely. It needs to be integrated into parts of how we look at running a business now, right? The same way balancing your books is something that every small business thinks about, making sure that you, especially in this digital age, are thinking about the security of your business, how and whom you're sharing data with, where money gets transferred to, how you're securing your digital ecosystem. I mean, for small businesses, the other thing, that we see is fraudulent representation of businesses, where you're not going to see this in the large retailers like an Amazon or a Walmart, but in smaller businesses where, a fake website gets stood up. And all of a sudden the name sounds similar and somebody starts putting in orders and those orders are going to a fraudster, right? So things like, how do you validate the authenticity of even a new website that you're putting up? How are you communicating that to your customers? There's so many things and facets of just running a business, and security should be a common thread that's woven through how a business operates every day.
So a big part of the BetaKit audience is obviously people who work in tech, founders of companies, people who are taking care of their customers, trying to protect their security. What I find really motivates our audience is hearing about smart people who are doing really hard things, right? It's motivating. It's the challenge of like, okay, they're doing this. What can I do, right? What can I learn from this person? So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about you and the team that you run at Mastercard, how you were trained and how you manage your team. So tell me a little bit about you. What did you study? How did you get into this field?
Yeah, I would say Didn't study fraud in school.
That should be a major, though, I think.
And I don't want to date myself, but it wasn't even something that was top of mind when I was in school. I did my undergrad at the University of Waterloo in biochemistry and business, which felt groundbreaking at the time, and then went on to do a master's degree at Wilfrid Laurier University in business administration. I had originally started my career in healthcare. And then moved into transportation. So totally different path. Have a background in finance. And then about 5.5 years ago, joined Mastercard. And really sort of just opened my eyes to so much I don't think we appreciate every day. We think, swipe your credit card, make a payment, but how much happens? We're not just a payments company, we're a technology company, and how much happens there. Most recently, I studied cybersecurity leadership at the University of Oxford. So that was a more formalized training, but a lot of the learning for me has happened through the work that we do. Through the experiences that we see, what we observe happening in the ecosystem, and the responsibility we know we have to be safeguarding. I think in Canada and globally, Mastercard's deeply committed to raising the standard of cybersecurity to build a better, more secure digital ecosystem for everyone. Trust is at the core of our business, and so for me personally, that was really when I kind of was exposed to it. A lot of that learning, a lot of there's a lot how quickly this is evolving, and the important role we play. I wanted to be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
So I became a fraud fighter.
I like it. Tell me about that process of staying on top of it. Tell me, I guess, first about your team. Like, how many people work for you? What kind of titles do they have? And how do you collectively stay on top of these new threats that are coming out every day?
Yeah. I mean, we are, a smaller team based in Canada, but we are part of a larger North America security team. The importance of that is that, and then obviously of a larger global organization that has a pretty robust technology stack. We look at all aspects of the life cycle when we think about even just a payments journey, everything from identity, right? So you talked about, how do you know who you are, and identity fraud and synthetic ID fraud, and how those things are related to opening up a bank account, opening up a new credit card. So we're at that part of the journey. We look across, things like resiliency of payment systems. We look at the use of AI as an underpinning tool. We look at the actual transactions that happen every day, and supporting, both financial institutions and merchants at understanding when a transaction could be flagged as fraudulent and how do you mitigate that risk. We look at protecting against cyber attacks. As a network, that's a pretty significant thing for us to be thinking about. We screen billions of transactions for multiple risk factors in milliseconds every day. And this has increased, the use of just AI as a tool, for example, has increased fraud detection by 2 to 3-fold. And we've deflected over $20 billion in fraud attacks across our network in the last year. That's in 1 year. That's so, crazy. Tools like that. We also look at, post-transaction. So there's things like this concept of first-party fraud, which is, when you're looking at disputes and chargebacks. And so we have tools and technology to help identify what's truly a fraudulent transaction or not, and what's actually happening. And a lot of this is around data transparency. It's around anomalies in behavior. As we talked about earlier, some of these things, it's not about the authorization of money movement. It's about irregular patterns of behavior, high value transactions. We do things like hesitancy modeling, which is the way in which you're setting up a payment transaction. Is it different than how you usually choose to transact? Are you sending it to somebody that you've never interacted with before? Yeah. How do we start to take all these data points and put them together?
That's my favorite thing is when I buy something weird and the bank is like, "Are you good? Was that for real?" And you're like, "No, I did want to buy that Instagram t-shirt, but thank you for noticing that that's out of character for me."
Right. Or if you're traveling somewhere and it'll be like, "Are you transacting in Japan?" And you're like, "Yes, I'm on vacation." But
I'm actually in Japan.
I'm actually in Japan.
Yeah. So it's fascinating, right? You're detectives, you're technologists. How do you build out that team? What are some of the the titles that you guys have? What are some of the skills that you look for? Where do you hire from when you're trying to put together people who can take on this challenge?
I think so. I mean, I think that's an interesting question. And I think you look for a wide, so we're not necessarily a team of fraud practitioners.
Right.
You've got a wide range of people who are savvy with being able to look at and understand data, because from data we can draw insights. And being a technology company of our size, data is obviously at the core of what we do. And building trust in the exchange of data is really, really important. And so I think that's an important skill set. I mean, we've got product managers in a more traditional sense, which is around, how do you keep up with what technology is out there? How do you use AI ethically and effectively? And I think one of the things that I often talk about is, the bad actors in the ecosystem are embracing the same technology we are. And the one thing I will caveat is the technology is good. Things like AI and Gen AI, we hear the scary stories. There's so many incredible use cases for how it is going to, improve the way we interact, the way we live, the efficiencies we can have in business, what it can do for us personally, and we need to embrace that. Right? It's not about shying away from that, but these cyber criminals, they don't have the guardrails that we operate in, right? They don't have regulation. We operate in a very, stringent regulatory environment. They don't worry about that. They don't worry about ethics.
Yeah.
They aren't worried about, making sure that we test a use case. So they're out there and they're moving quickly.
Yeah.
Because they're like, we will test and we will fail and we will try again, because their only goal is to successfully be able to commit this fraud.
It must sometimes feel like whack-a-mole that every time you do something, a new threat pops up. Right now it's AI, now it's deep fakes. Do you feel like you're leading the conversation, like you're on top of it, or you're just constantly reacting?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think there's always going to be, with these sophisticated cyber criminals, they're going to be trying new ways, right? New ways to scam, new ways to commit fraud. And these criminal tactics are always evolving, right? So thwarting is a kind of trying to evade fraud or fight fraud it sort of feels like a never ending arms race. And some of the times it means a little bit more friction.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things I think that is something we all have to get used to, because we've gotten used to in the digital world, convenience, ease, quickly. It's, I want to be able to just type in a password and get into an account and not have to worry about anything else. And I know as retailers often think about the less friction, the better. These are like the things from a consumer experience or customer experience we always talk about. But adding friction gives people a moment to pause and think.
Yeah.
Adding friction allows for multiple levels of being able to validate that the behavior somebody wants to do, that they're the right person, that they're validating that the person doing it is who they say they are, that the action they're taking is what should be done. And so, we talk about passwords, right? Being a common, I just use that example of typing in a password, but we know that passwords is sort of, it's stressful. When we think about passwords.
I don't have any more left in me, honestly. I can't think of another password.
On my way here today, was trying to log into an app, and I was like, I just reset my password 3 days ago.
No idea what it was.
Can't remember it. And I'm resetting it again. And it's stressful. And now you're being forced to be like, don't just put in your puppy's name. It's got to be strong. Don't even know what strong means anymore. But this movement, Matt, of what can we do to migrate to leverage technology to be able to make things more secure. I mean, at Mastercard, we're investing in things like biometrics and AI. We have our new biometric authentication service, which really takes this idea of a traditional password and moves it from a password to the person themselves. So things like your iris scan, right? Your thumbprint, things that are uniquely on your person, and using those for authentication. We talk about multi-factor authentication, and people say, oh, even the one-time passwords that you get, which is you log in and then it sends a text message to your phone. With some of the scans we see around SIM swap scams where they're actually able to go in, swap out your SIM to another phone virtually, and then get that multi-factor authentication to a remote device. The multiple layers of authentication, adding a friction to this process is so critical. So it is about convenience. Yes, I'd love, instead of having to remember a password, to just, I think most people who've used an online mobile banking app have probably done face recognition and been able to use that as a method of authentication in. But the more layers and the more sort of friction that we can, in some of these instances, create, the more secure we can ensure those interactions are.
I find that so fascinating, just from like a career path trajectory, but also managing your team, right? Thinking about those dual pressures. We need to facilitate the seamless, financial transactions of our global marketplace. We need to make sure people can spend money when they want to, wherever they want to, but we have to make sure that it's safe, right? Like, those are insanely high stakes. So what are those conversations like? How do you guys navigate that tension?
Yeah, no, that's a great. I want to say it's a unique dichotomy, but not so unique anymore, right? Because it's something we talk about every day. And you're right, it's balancing convenience and speed and ease of use with safety and security. And so part of that is looking at what stages are we building awareness so that friction feels welcome. I would equate it to checking into a flight. So you go into the airport, people, traditionally there'd be a long queue, you'd wait in line, you'd go up to an agent at the airport, you would then provide all of your documentation, you would check in, you get a printed boarding pass, and you leave. Slowly, with, the increase in sort of digitization, airlines started to move that to say, okay, you know what, you can check in now at a kiosk.
Right.
Now that's actually creating more work for you. Right?
Everything's creating more work for me.
You've got to go there. You've got to go in there. You've got to type it. You've got to scan it. But that increased friction is allowing you to, number one, you're sort of in control of that process. And then that second step is now they're doing the validation. Yeah. Right. So you've done the check-in work and now somebody's validating your ID. They're validating. So these sort of like elements of, I look at that process and I'm like, there is more friction. Now I've got to 24 hours before remember to go in and do it on my app so that I can then make sure that I get a seat that I want. And then I still go in and get my boarding pass maybe. And then I still go in and get my ID validated. But people have gotten used to that, right? As like the process. And sometimes when some of that onus is on you and you understand why you're doing this, I'm doing this because then I'm not going to have to wait in a line. That's the airport, right? I'm not going to have to wait in a line at the airport. I'm going to do this. The same way, some of these steps around, okay, you know what, I'm going to make sure I set up all the multi-factor authentication because it's going to make sure that I'm safe. Yeah. And it's going to make sure. So that building that awareness helps to determine at what points in that journey is a little bit of friction going to be accepted and even welcome. Yeah. Because people know that it's helping to safeguard their information, their data, their identities, their families, their savings. Like it kind of goes on and on.
So it's Cybersecurity Month, but it's also Small Business Month. So I want to talk a little bit about this from the perspective of business owners. It can be overwhelming. Just listening to some of this is overwhelming, right? All the tools, all the attacks that can potentially get you. A lot of these small businesses, they don't have cybersecurity people on staff. They might not have expertise in this. How do you advise small businesses to think about starting to tackle this problem?
Yeah. And I agree with you. It can feel overwhelming. And so I think, I encourage small businesses to use tools that are available to their businesses. From a Mastercard perspective, we offer many resources for small businesses, including, a course in partnership with Digital Main Street to just learn about cybersecurity, this free cybersecurity assessment tool that I manage that's available for, even just to understand like where your knowledge is, what you could, how protected your business is, and these are
actually assess the risk.
Risk that you have, but it also gives recommendations on what you could do about that, about closing the gap, right,
Right.
on that risk. These are available on Mastercard's Trust Center, which has lots of kind of tools and information available for businesses to be able to access for free.
Yeah.
Because it's important that they feel like they're informed. Business owners, we want to, whether you're a beginner or an expert on the topic, there are videos, there are guides, there are handbooks, and these are all available for download. So I would encourage, all small businesses to go and take a look and see what's out there, do the cyber security assessment, and, be able to start to take some of those actions to protect themselves. From a global perspective, Mastercard also offers a course through the Global Cyber Alliance learning portal, which provides insight and education on cybersecurity issues, as well as precautions that businesses can take, what best practices are to kind of safeguard your business. And businesses there are also firms out there that specialize in going in and on a business by business basis, being able to help reduce security risks.
Right.
And
It's the same sort of thing. We'll do a scan of how you're operating, identify what your gaps are, tell you what to do.
Right. And a little bit more maybe bespoke and hands-on when you can get some of these like consulting services. And then, we talk about IT security tools, right? So the importance in just, when we talk about increased connectivity and the Internet of Things, we hear that IoT, the concept, security tools can help you control access, prevent unauthorized connections. We talked about kind of supply chain risk, but we also talked about cyber attacks. So the importance of just what are the steps you can take to just say, okay, I'm going to, protect that interaction. I'm going to make sure that I take this extra step to make sure that I don't have an unauthorized user accessing my system. These are just a few examples, but I think encourage all businesses to be thinking about how do I take some steps? How do I make this part of, my, kind of roadmap of how I'm going to plan forward in my business, because security is just as critical, if not more, than every other aspect of like the core of what you do. And by securing your business, you can focus on the important things, right? Like delivering your goods and services.
What do you see when you talk? Like, you must talk to people about this all the time, right? Before and after bad things have happened. What do you see is the barrier for business owners particularly? Is it time? Is it money? Is it just exhaustion of like, here's another thing I got to do. I got to update all my systems. Like, what do you think's getting in the way?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. And I think part of it is I have limited resources to invest.
Yeah.
Where should I be investing them? How do I know I'm prioritizing the right places to safeguard? I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
Right? How do I learn about what I should be thinking about and what's top of mind, which is why I think our commitment to the education piece at Mastercard has been really important, because we recognize you're running a business. You have enough things to worry about. And so trying to become a cybersecurity expert is not something.
Right.
And so oftentimes it's human nature to say, you know what, that feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it to the side and think about it later.
Yeah.
And that just perpetuates risk. So how do we ensure that how do we get this readiness stats when we say that, only 16% of small businesses surveyed felt that they were truly ready?
Yeah, that's
right.
crazy.
That's a very low number.
It is.
And so I think like the primary goal is how do we get the education out there so that people start to feel like, okay, at least I know what those risks are. The next step is, okay, how do I take these small steps to safeguard? It doesn't need to be hiring a cybersecurity expert who sits in, like, you're not hiring a security guard for your cyber interactions.
Right.
But what you do need to do is take these steps, and each of these steps, vigilance, awareness, I believe that knowledge is power.
Right.
And the more knowledgeable we are about anything, it's no different than, we drill into our kids' heads, look both ways before you cross the street, because the child's instinct is just to run.
Yeah.
Right. And so slowly you build that repetition, and that behavior will now, as adults, most adults will look both ways before they cross the street.
Yeah.
Right. And keep them. So how do we, those types of everyday safety practices where it just becomes second nature, how do we build the awareness and the education so that small businesses are thinking like that as well?
When you talk to people who have been through this, right, where something bad has happened, they've been robbed or ripped off in some way, do you find that they usually know what they should have done? Like, they're like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have clicked that, or I should have changed my password. Like, did people have an understanding of where things went wrong, or not really?
I think it depends on the complexity of the situation. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it might be a little bit more complex, but oftentimes there's this feeling of like, how could that have happened to me, right?
Yeah.
Or how could that have happened to my business? Because people feel they're aware.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to believe they're being vigilant,
Yeah.
right? And so there's that feeling of like, how did I get duped, right? Or like, how did that happen to me? So I think it increases vigilance again after the fact. I think a lot of times it's very easy in hindsight to track back to say, oh, you know what, I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
I think everyone, whether they're willing to admit it or not, has probably had an instance where they've clicked on something where they're like, oh, I shouldn't have clicked on that because it's taking me somewhere and I'm just going to either shut it all down, or you might have gotten a little bit too far down the path and been like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have shared that information. And so I think part of this is just it becomes part of how we live.
Yeah.
Right. And there are risks in this world. This is another risk. It's probably here to stay. And so it's really just important that we are protecting ourselves against this risk, being aware of identifying it, and leveraging, the tools that are at our disposal to be able to safeguard what we're doing and every interaction to protect our businesses and ourselves and our families.
I think a little bit less scared than I did at the beginning of this conversation, right? Obviously, there's a lot going on. As you said, we're probably not going to go back to a time where this isn't a threat. But it feels like there are people on top of it. There feels like there are things that we can all start doing on a regular basis to try and sort of combat this. Are there things I want to end on that note? Is there work that you're doing or a partnership that you're doing that you're excited about as part of this effort?
Yeah. I think just holistically, just to what you were talking about, to succeed and protect against fraud risk, we need to embrace sort of this proactive, multi-layered approach. And it includes, technology solutions, it includes industry collaboration, and in addition, this need for us to elevate global awareness. Right? This type of fraud, this includes setting new industry standards, empowering consumers, and essential kind of anti-fraud education. To that end, Mastercard has partnered with the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, which aims to bring governments and consumers and financial authorities and law enforcement and, the financial industry, the telco sector, internet service providers, big tech, cybersecurity companies together to share intelligence. And to come together to build a network, to join forces, so to speak, to really define concrete solutions to protect consumers, to protect small businesses, and really to protect the ecosystem at large.
Yeah.
And I think just there should be some, to me, these kinds of things give me confidence that there are a lot of invested parties at the table saying, you know what? Yes, the bad actors in the ecosystem are out there and they're taking technology and they're out there in this fight. But the way to win this fight is for us to come together and to be able to share. And I truly believe that we have that opportunity in front of us. And it gives me confidence to feel like, being able to partner with like the Global Anti-Scam Alliance as an example is just how industry is coming together in this way.
So there are bad guys, but there are also good guys. There's like the Avengers of global cybersecurity. You guys you're assembling the team. For MasterCard specifically, you feel optimistic about where you guys are going and the tools that you have at your disposal?
Yeah, I think our commitment to security is so at the core of what we do, building trust and creating a secure digital ecosystem where everyone feels like it's safe to interact and transact. And so when we think about that, I think our investment in technology is, critical. And as new technologies are being developed, we are constantly kind of on the forefront of how are we ensuring that we're investing in the right technologies, developing the right tools, and also building the right use cases to be able to protect and safeguard the ecosystem. But I think simultaneously, we're also very committed to educating the market, to building global awareness, to this importance around, our role in being able to get information out there, make tools available, as I mentioned, on things like the Mastercard Trust Center, and make them easily available and accessible to everyone. To ensure that we're really talking about, security should also be inclusive, right? Everyone should have access to being able to safeguard, themselves, their personal information, their businesses. Ultimately that, and I think I said it earlier, but this is a fight that we can't go at alone. We need to do this together. And so just, again, reiterating the importance of enhanced data sharing and collaboration across industry is so critical and something that we're very committed to. And I believe kind of pairing all of these three things together is going to help us kind of win this fight. And I don't think, like I said, I don't think this is something that's going to be, that we're going to easily be able to say it's over and we don't need to worry about these things anymore. I think we're constantly going to have to be vigilant. But I do believe that there are more tools on the side of the good guys, as you said, to go out there and come together and really help in protecting and safeguarding. We just all need to make sure that we're playing our parts.
Yeah. And not a boring job, I would imagine.
Never a dull moment.
Thank you so much. This has been so interesting. And I'm going to go home and I think, take a good look at my cybersecurity hygiene. But I really appreciate your time. It's been so fascinating. And you've given us a lot to think about. So thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.